continuous push and continuous work needs to be there. Because if we stop trying, government will fall back in its default position. And that's not where we need government to be. To me, design means the act of creation, right? So it's about how we create and change our world, whether it's physical world, virtual world, processes in the world. And of course, that also means that design is about creating value, right? We don't want to do something as human beings or societies that is not valuable. Now, then you can have big discussions about how you create value and what value you want to create and so on. But I would also say that one of the challenges in the field of design is this big concern with how we understand it, the term, the word, the space, how we define design. And what's been very liberating to me is that now I just focus on solving problems with people, not on how we define design. Because actually, we should maybe spend less time on defining what it is and doing it well and with impact and with value. So growing up in Denmark, I think it's impacted the way I look at the world in different ways. One is, of course, to be part of an environment that's quite well designed and aesthetic. Part is that I grew up with using technology and computers a lot because my father was involved in that space. But another part of growing up in Denmark is to grow up in a place where we see the public sector and government as part of the solution, not so much the problem. And a society where we debate and work on things to improve them all the time. So having a Danish background, but working internationally, I'm privileged to come from a country with a very high level of trust, quite a high level of critical thinking, the ability to challenge authority, acceptance that that's what we do. And that is something that we cannot take for granted, of course, in many other cultures and societies. However, of course, that influences how I approach problem solving or collaboration. That's the starting point for me to work with people on a basis of trust and that we have the same intent of changing things for the better and so on. But clearly that can create some tension potentially. There is the risk with design and designers that they will say design can fix anything. It's the solution to whatever problem. But if you were to say which kinds of problems are best fit and which are not, I would say problems at a high policy and high level of complexity that require lateral thinking, a lot of co-creation, a lot of different kinds of visualization, high level of vision and ambition, that's very well fit for design, so design for policy. Design is also extremely well suited for services and for reimagining and reinventing great and transformative services for people. But where design maybe is not the right answer is when it comes to more incremental innovation, where it's more about fine-tuning, optimizing operations. There, Six Sigma, lean management, and those kinds of Toyota production system, that kind of thing, quality circles are much, much more suited, I would say. Yeah, so I believe that both designers and policymakers need to be able to challenge their assumptions about problems. Now, that's a skill that many designers have because they keep asking questions and inquiring into a problem space. The same should go for policymakers or politicians. We also need people, designers, policymakers, who are able to envision different futures and have an ambition to change things for the better. And finally, we need both good designers and policymakers that are able to and interested in experimentation and testing and trying things out. Those are three traits that I think are quite important. The space of design has addressed the question of scalability by inventing something called design thinking. And design thinking has become design in a bottle almost, as a very prescriptive methodology and set of steps that anyone can use in a management position or in a development position or whatever, even in their own life. And so that has been an incredible success when it comes to scalability of designers' methods and mindsets. The backside of that is that deep practice and great design, excellence in design, you could say, cannot be achieved through a set of tools or processes. And also the ethics and the values in design or in innovation cannot be achieved just through some tools. So design actually has become incredibly scaled to business schools all over the world and schools of public administration all over the world, but has not necessarily improved because of that. And that's a big dilemma in the field today. Yeah, so what is required from the governance around major transitions is that we build ways of working together that sit between the silos, across them, across levels, and across disciplines. And we're not very good at that because we're not very good at institutionalizing something that doesn't fit neatly into a sector or box of an organization. So right now, and this is a big part of my work, is we are exploring how would you then design those types of new structures, both for making decisions, for operations, for getting insight and learning, for doing things in a portfolio of interventions, and creating really new types of organisms or institutions that are quite different from what we've seen so far, but which are needed to be effective in this world. The way you work with design for impact and for value is that you integrate a designerly mindset and attitudes and thinking in how you run strategy, how you build organizations, how you work with leadership. So that could be to say, to develop a good strategy, how are you also situational? How do you think about places and spaces and events that are impacted by strategy? Or how are you ensuring that you're both human and also include, by the way, non-human actors, how you think about impact of strategy? Or if you think about how to build organizations well, how do you then co-design? How do you involve people? How do you visualize new types of futures of the organization? How do you envisage new scenarios of how work life could be in a place where the organization has changed, and so on? So in my mind, design is really integrated into how we do the things we do, but it's not a point in itself, actually. Design is not valuable as design. Design is invaluable because of what it can do in other contexts. So a successful outcome of building very different governance models is first and foremost to build it for the very long term, 8 to 10 years. It's to mobilize the key actors that are needed to address the problem. It's to build a decision-making structure where we can make flexible decisions about what is needed as needs change over time as the context changes. And I think lastly, it's critical to build a learning model where we continuously learn from the interventions, from experiments, and use that learning to drive new decisions and changes to the mission. Yeah, so the kind of organizational capacities and the skill sets that are needed for what we are looking for are organizations that are creating flourishing environments for people, organizations that create space for creativity, organizations that create space for people to be at their very best as human beings, not just as employees or parts of a big machinery. It's organizations that are very ambitious for the long term and where they want to go, but are also adaptive and flexible when it comes to the shorter term and how they can move and change as the context changes. So there are quite a lot of, I would say, requirements on organizations that allow not just designers, but design-oriented methods and processes to flourish. What are the crucial ingredients that a government organization needs to really leverage the power of design? I think at a fundamental level, there should be a shared understanding and language around elements in design, right? For example, understanding ideation, understanding prototyping, experimentation, understanding how to work iteratively, and so on. So there's a language thing, a mental model really around what design can do, right? Then there is, I think, the very operational side, which is to have skills and competencies in design. It's not enough to say we went to a course in design thinking. You actually have to employ actual trained designers, for example, from digital design or from graphics and visual design and from strategic and design management and so on. And then I think you should work with metrics or good learning questions around what are we achieving, not because of design, but because of the work that's done leveraging design to create impact. Yeah, so what skill sets do designers need to impact policymaking? That's a very, very good question because many designers are uncomfortable with power They do not know much about how the public sector works. They don't necessarily understand how a policy process works. So the first skill set is to understand the context and the system that you're part of and be really curious and fast to learn how does government function. Before you know that, you can't start changing it. And then the second one, of course, is to be a likable and respectful, but also critical sparring partner for civil servants and for typical managers and leaders inside the public sector, to work with them not as a challenger, but also as a partner to help them achieve what they are working on by all the power and the tools and skills and methods that you bring in as a designer. So where should we head when it comes to design in the public sector and design for policy? Well, I believe that we should head to a place where the way designers work and design skills are an integrated part of the policy formulating units and teams and organizations within government, right? So that the methods, processes, tools, mindsets of designers and their skills are an integrated part of how policy is made. But they're not always connected closely enough to where the action is, and that's where we need designers to be. The importance of a program like PONT is that governments are not built for change, they're built for stability. Governments and public organizations have a lot of inertia, and they tend to prefer the status quo, and they are very rarely ready to question fundamental assumptions about what they do. And so it is an uncomfortable fit with design and innovation practitioners versus public sector administrators, lawyers, economists, and the whole culture in the public sector. Now that means that we will continue to have a pressure and continuous programs and initiatives to bring in other types of skills, other types of capacities, other types of people into government to allow it to be more dynamic, to be more strategic about change, and to also be more human in how it adopts change, because that is also what designers bring in. Where does it lead us if we take a design approach in policymaking? It leads us to a place where we can both collaboratively envision impactful, meaningful, positive futures. It takes us to a place where we have the tools and the processes to collaborate across disciplines, across levels, across sectors, to build the solutions, build the projects, build the initiatives, the regulation, the policies to get there. It also allows us to work in a learning manner, experimental manner, with finding out what works over time as we explore different paths and avenues towards that future. All of that is the promise that design and designers give to policymakers. So what is the opportunity that this specific time brings for Europe? I think it is for Europe to step forward as the world's biggest and wealthiest and most value-based force for positive change. It's a moment when everybody else is led by interest of business or the interest of dictatorship and authority, Europe is led by the interest of its people. And we need to show that way for others to follow. So it can maybe be said quite simply, what's at stake when it comes to the change that design can offer? As one senior leader said to me in a workshop, how can we build human services with inhuman systems? And bringing fundamental human perspective of life, everyday life, and increasingly also the perspective of other living beings on our planet into how we consider everything we do in government is the ultimate power that design brings.